So tonight is the last one in our series tonight, and this entire series is devoted to making sure that people have very practical, tried and true, effective strategies, practices, and programs to put in place within their school system. All of our work is situated within CI3T, which is a comprehensive, integrated, three-tiered models of prevention. I know many of you have supported this and implemented it on your own and implemented it in your classroom. And in brief, you can think of that as a broadening of traditional tiered systems of support, and it's broadened to also address social and emotional well-being. We focus on integration within and across the tiers. And so when we were thinking about this work that we're talking about tonight, although it is a tier 3 behavioral support, in the ideal world, you might be in a system that's already has an integrated tiered system, either CI3T or something comparable. But ideally, you want to build a base that is teaching explicitly behavior, just like you teach academics. And it also in CI3T addresses social and emotional well-being. And we put all that together in an integrated way. In earlier sessions in Empower, we talked a lot about what is this, and then how do you use screening to make decisions about who needs more, and how do you use the data to empower teachers with different low intensity supports. And then how do you use multiple sources of data to connect kids to supports? And like last time, we talked about direct behavior rating, which is a validated tier 2 intervention. So tonight, we are going to continue our journey through this process. And you might notice when Elise and Mark and David and Eric and Wendy and others tonight are facilitating and walking you through some of this content that you're going to start to notice a lot of the things that are in the base, things like behavior specific praise, pre-corrections, and choice. You're going to see elements of those embedded into this tier 3 support. So this whole intervention tonight is going to be helping us to situate the multiple needs of students that have the most intensive intervention needs. And this is different in the sense that it is uniquely designed for them. So it's not like grabbing an on-demand intervention and doing it with every single person. We're going to learn what the main behavior is, the target behavior that you would like to see less of, and the replacement behavior that you would like to see more of, but we need to make sure it's most often serving the same functional needs, like it's helping them to either get something or to avoid something. So this is going to be your sweet spot for thinking about the communicative intent of behavior. And in this process, we're going to share with you one particular approach to designing, implementing, and evaluating functional assessment-based interventions. And we're going to be using these modules that are here on this page. And if you are logging in, and this is the very first time that you've been here, you're going to want to sign up as a first-time user. But again, if you've already done this, you do not need to do it again. You're just going to get ready to roll on those modules. And if you were to take a snapshot, a picture of everything that's there, you're going to find a bank of resources, resources for leaders, for screening, for working at tier 1, the low intensity strategies, tier 2 and tier 3, as well as information to build your base. Now, one thing we do want to highlight, you might notice that in addition to the overall overview of FABI, there's actually 5 additional modules, one for each set. And that is because it is a more complex intervention. And the good news is it's completely validated, tested. It's actually one of the things that you'll find on What Works Clearinghouse guides for how to really efficiently and effectively manage challenging behavior for kids that are exposed to multiple risk factors and kids that need additional supports. So as you're thinking about these resources for tonight, you're going to think a little bit tonight about big picture overview. But if you walk out of here on fire like Elise was when she took this class from David many, many years ago, and if you want to be that person that's going to lead it in a district or lead it in a group, you're going to want to make sure you prepare to dig a little deeper across those steps. As always, if this is your first time working with a module, you might take a look at this infographic to learn a little bit about how to navigate the modules, how to use the table of contents, which is like that sidebar to navigate through the chapters. And there's information about where you can find the interactive resource, which is at the bottom of that infographic. So if you just want to listen to it first, it'll take you all through it. And then, of course, how to turn the pages. So tonight is very special. It's the last of our sessions for Project Empower. And we have all the plans in place for next year. We have the sessions, and thanks to the innovative people on this team, we even have now a new way of registering, and we'll give you some time to look at that tonight, where if you want to, you can, rather than registering separately for each session you want to attend, you can go in one time, click those that you'd like to put into your calendar and register. And these are just one piece of support that we provide as part of that data-informed professional learning journey for the adults. So let's go ahead and dig in and get started. As we think about where we are tonight, there are three main outcomes. The first thing we want to do is talk about where this tier 3 intervention is situated within a Ci3T model of prevention. And some of you that are here tonight are in schools and in districts. Some of your schools and districts actually have a full-blown Ci3T implementation manual. And I would bet there's a good probability that you've got functional assessment-based interventions listed right now as one of the interventions that your district offers. The second objective is we're going to explain the 5 steps about how to do this. And you will not come out of here a pro ready to go and go knock it out of the park for the next 25 years. You're going to get a really good, solid overview. You're going to get to practice some of the elements. At least you've done a great job of setting us up to have all these wonderful activities. And I know people like David and Mark and Wendy and Eric have taught this at the university level and have taught literally hundreds of in-service teachers. So we're grateful for that. And we know we've got some people from Vermont tonight that will be joining us because this is something that they're exploring for their behavior specialists to take on as a potential model. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the importance of 3 things, not only looking at how students do, but really making sure we know if it is happening when the intervention's designed. And that is measuring treatment integrity. So you can look to see which of the antecedent adjustments, the shifts in reinforcement, and the extinction components are put in place as planned. And lastly, nothing should be happening without social validity. Before you start and at the end, it's a bookend assessment to find out before you get started, what does everybody think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes? And it's not just teachers and families, but the students themselves, because we want to make sure every stakeholder is feeling like this is something that they'd be comfortable with, because we know that if they feel more comfortable with the goals, the procedures, and the intended outcomes, they're more likely to put it in place as planned, and therefore it is then likely to yield the desired outcome. So that is where we're going tonight. Overview of the situation within Ci3T, then we'll give you an overview of FABI, the 5-step process, and then we'll wrap it up. So just a reminder, we are working right here at the bottom of the right-hand side. We are where it says Tier 3 Functional Assessment-Based Interventions. And David, thanks to you for getting this set up, not only for this year, but for next year as well. And if you are somebody that is here from Topeka Public Schools, shout out to Nettie Johnson, who shared with us all the details about what the state of Kansas has set up to really and promote not only intending professional learning, but being impactful in how it's done. So in Kansas, and I've been sharing this with other states, and some states are like, oh my gosh, that is a great idea. We should do this. So when they come to something like that, they earn 1 point per hour. So tonight they would earn 2 hours of professional learning credit. Then, if they can show that they took this and applied it with kids in their building, that is the application process. When they get that in place, their professional learning points are double. So 2 becomes 4. And then it's like the set of Ronco knives. If they then can show impact for students that they collected baseline, they put it in place, they took it away, they put it back in. When that testing is done, that is looking at impact, they can earn triple. So tonight's 2 points can become 6 points. And that intervention I was just mentioning for you about triple R, we had 32 teachers that we got to work with this year, and they did an extended professional learning opportunity, and they earned 18 points of professional learning. So kudos to them for getting it in place. If you have more questions about that, I am sure our team can help share a little bit about what that looks like in their district. So let's go ahead and jump in. So where is this situated? So first of all, I need to give a shout out to dear friend and colleague, John Umbright. I have known him since my very first faculty job, and he and Jolena Farrow and Carl Leopson and I have worked with Wendy and many other people that I've already mentioned tonight to design, implement, and evaluate FABI. And this is squarely situated as a tier 3 support. So this is designed not for everybody, but for students who have needed more than tier 1 has to offer. And in many cases, tier 1 has to offer. And in many cases, these same kids have already tried a tier 2 and it has not yet met their needs. Sometimes you go directly from tier 1 to tier 3, and often you progress through the tiers. I remember one time in a conversation with John, whom I love and adore, and he's like, we really should just talk to teachers about every single kid having a FABI. And I'm like, John, if you say those out loud in front of a room full of teachers, they will hurt you. I would not advise that, because this is a wonderful process, but it is a labor-intensive process. The good news is, though, if you're lucky enough to be in a system where the base is built, where you have clarity at tier 1 about how to teach academics and what the expectations are and how to respond respectfully when challenges happen. And if you're also in a place where there's clarity on what is offered for students that have tier 2 and tier 3 needs, this becomes much less complicated in the sense that people will come to you with data to say, here's what it's looking like in my class at tier one. Here is what I've tried at tier two. And here are the data to suggest that even when I did this intervention, self-monitoring, behavior contracts, direct behavior ratings, social skills intervention, that even with all that in place, it may not have yet been sufficient to suffice. So this is one of oftentimes a couple different tier three interventions that you might find in place in a district. And the team that built this module did a great job of building out this wonderful little infographic that you might choose to download and use tonight, after tonight. But it clarifies the tier three supports. And some of you who were here last time, you're like, oh my gosh, that looks so much like the tier two one. True story. So this is telling you what it looks like at tier three. So just a couple quick reminders, there are no tier three kids. There are students that have tier three needs. And these tier three interventions can be provided in a range of locations. And in some instances, tier three interventions are one-to-one, but in this particular situation, this intervention can often be implemented squarely in the general education or special education context. Tier three in this model is not special education, although some students who are receiving special education services may get this extra support, but you don't have to be in special education to receive it. And similarly, tier three could be a strategy, it could be a practice, it could be a program. And remember, it's not a person, but it's what the person does. And so when you think about your specific Ci3T implementation manual, the gift of clarity is that in your manual, if you go all the way to the bottom of it before frequently asked questions, you have a whole bank of what your district's already committed to doing. And we can't do everything, so we have to make sure that what we are doing, we're doing well. I know when Tammy was a principal, before she, I'm going to say this in the most affectionate way possible, may not have passed retirement because I think she is working just as many hours now as she did before. But I had the honor of getting to work closely with her and her Ci3T leadership team. And she was somebody who always pushed me as a professional, like, we need this intervention now. So I know she brought in functional assessment-based interventions like you're going to hear about tonight. She brought in de-escalation plans, and it was a set of, you don't need a million interventions. You need really good ones with sufficient information to make sure that they work. Some of them might be reading interventions. If you're here tonight as a middle or high school person, this would be an excellent tier three reading intervention. And if you're interested in learning more about those, we've got a wonderful resource that Wendy Oakes designed. But when you look at any grid, it's going to describe the resource. You're going to see a description of what it is. And very importantly, and this is a distinct feature in Ci3T, it's not a crapshoot as to who gets what. It's not a pressure on the teacher. It's not a pressure on the parent. 3 times a year, you're going to look at school-wide data. And the teacher themselves can do this. They can individually open up their plan, look at their data, and see who might need more. And then any intervention that's done, we make sure of 3 things. You're measuring student performance. You are looking before you start anything on that social validity to see what they think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes. And third, we are measuring if it's in place. And I want to assure you, you do not need to be perfect in implementation of all this. But we want to make sure that we are keeping track of which components in this component intervention is happening. And then we have to have a plan to know this succeeded and I can begin to fade it, or this might need to be enhanced, no pun intended, or this might be terrific and it might be time to generalize or fade my intervention. So many of these, like de-escalation plans, and this will be one that we'll talk a little bit more about next year and is also on our website, very popular. And so in yesterday's session, we got to work with about 150 teachers, and we introduced them to a tier 1 practice about looking at a 6-step approach to responding to challenging behaviors. And that's something we do for everybody. This particular intervention would be for kids that got that from their teacher, maybe something else at tier 2 and still needed more. And it was wonderful. Yesterday at the session, there were a couple of teachers who were like, this isn't going to be enough. And we're like, it's not going to be enough for everybody. So let's connect you with what will work. So tonight, here is where we are going to work. We're going to work at tier 3. And sometimes it will be things like social skills interventions happening at tier 2, plus an individual follow-up weekly to have a point of check-in, additional prompting, additional reinforcement. But for tonight, what I want you to know is that there's a host of things that work, like wraparound services. And this is important. In your Ci3T manual, tier 3 ideally is also reflective of your interventions and your supports that you engage with your community partners. We get that question a lot, like the things that are happening outside the school, should they be listed there? Yes, absolutely. Because this is one coordinated document to say this is all of the wonderful ways we get to work with our community partners and our school site partners and families and the students themselves to meet their multiple needs. So keeping that in mind when you're thinking about tonight and tier three, process would be the same. You're going to look at data. Are they attending? How much time have they missed? Much time are they tardy? How many office discipline referrals have they earned? What are their SRSSIE data looking like? And I know in the South, you guys call it the CIRSE. So like, what are their internalizing scores looking like? Their externalizing scores? How are they doing in terms of reading performance? When we say look at multiple sources of data, Wendy and I have been teeing people up on this for years. It's not that you need multiple screeners. You need to look at multiple sources of information and look at that holistically. This is an example of what it might look like. And then you can start to engage in this data informed decision making process. Mark Buckman and I have this Project Screen Part 2 that's going to build on the work that we got to do with Wendy Oakes in Project Screen Part 1, where we're actually going to introduce a new tool if that gets funded to actually make this problem solving process a little more explicit so that you can go from here's your manual, find your data, and then make decisions about what needs to happen in terms of next steps. And as you think right now, what is happening in your building, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be the prom queen. You don't have to, be the first place person on the podium. But what are you currently doing right now in your context? Could you pop that in the chat? And please put what is real, not what you wish is real. I used to tell kids all the time, what is true is not what you wish it would be. It's what really happened. So what is really happening right now? So what are you doing for kids that potentially have tier three needs? So maybe targeted conferences. And if you are intensifying check in, check out, like doing more than what's typically done at tier three, I've seen some people do because traditional check in, check out would be a tier two, but some people have added on a brief functional assessment to the check in, check out to bump it up to be a tier three support. And I think you're right. Like I'm watching in the text, sometimes there's misconceptions where people think this is special education or they think it is a person doing this. And so I'm going to encourage you to think about exactly what you're doing right now. And I love the fact we've got already people mentioning academics, we've got behavior, we've got emotional well-being set up. So as we pop through tonight, I'm going to invite you to keep your answer in mind. And at the end, you might think, what else could we do after tonight, after you've heard a little bit more? Let's go ahead and jump right in.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So in this next section, we are going to start with an overview of functional assessment-based intervention. And like Kathleen shared, our hope is that we're able to share high level, what are the 5 steps of this approach? What does this look like? And see if it might be a good fit for you and something you're interested in learning more about. So when we think about functional assessment-based intervention, it is a tier 3 support. So it is going to be found in your intervention grid. If you are a school that uses Ci3T, you'd scroll all the way to the bottom until you get to those intervention grids, and you'll see something that looks like this. And what we're typically looking for here is students who have the most significant behavior intervention needs. So when we're looking at our behavior screening data, we're looking for kids who are in that high risk category. Might be for internalizing, might be for externalizing, but we're looking for kids at the high risk. We're also looking at other sources like office discipline referrals, students who are getting a lot of suspensions in school, out of school, getting sent to the office a lot. You might also see some academic indicators. So maybe a lot of course failures, or maybe a lot of missing work, or potentially some screening data that shows we've got some areas in need academically. So we're looking at both behavior and academics when we think about who might be a good fit for this really intensive behavior intervention. So thinking about your school, if you're at a Ci3T school, you could pull up your manual. And if not, you could think about what types of data do you have available that would help you decide if a student was a good fit for a functional behavior assessment. You can pop that in the chat. Yep. So if you're using SRSSIE, looking at that high risk for externalizing, office discipline referrals, definitely. Expulsions, suspensions. Yeah. Right. So buddy room usage, well, that's a great one, right? That can be sneaky. That really adds up. The amount of time you're out of the classroom in the buddy room, that can add up quickly. So yeah, thinking about like what are the sources of data you have that you'd be able to look at to say who are our students who are needing this type of support. And when we think about what is functional assessment-based intervention, it is a customized intervention. It's designed for each student. It's really tailored to the student to think about why is a particular behavior occurring and what can we change to set the student up for success. And it's developed through this 5-step team-based process that is manualized, and it's grounded in applied behavior analytic principles. And you might be wondering, like, man, I've heard that acronym like FBA before, a functional behavioral assessment. And that's kind of like an umbrella term. And functional assessment based intervention, or FABI, is one type of FBA. And it's something that we use at Tier 3. It's a Tier 3 support. And it can also be used for students who have IEPs. For some students who receive special education services, they have an FBA or a behavior intervention plan, a BIP, as part of their IEP. This process also works for that. And if that's how you're intending to use it, you just want to make sure you check out your state regulations, because every state's different on who can do what and why and how. So you'd want to make sure you check into that. But this is a process that works both for Tier 3 or for that process that you might have heard, the FBA in general. So when we think about those 5 steps, we've got this infographic right here, and we're going to go through high level what each of those are. So the first step is just identifying which students might be a good fit for functional assessment-based intervention. So thinking about looking at those multiple sources of data, who's needing this type of intervention and support. And then in step 2, we collect lots of data. This is the information gathering step. We're going to interview the teacher, interview the family, interview the student. We're going to observe the classroom, observe the student. We might do some records reviews and rating scales. It's just generating lots of information that can help us figure out what's going on here. Why might this behavior be happening? And in this step, this is where we define the target behavior. That's the challenging behavior, the one we want to decrease. We want to see less of. So calling out, off task, profanity, negative peer interactions, those behaviors we want to decrease. And we're also going to define our replacement behavior. What do you want the student to do instead? Raising their hand, positive peer interactions, academic engagement, those 2 pieces. So that's what's happening in step 2. Once we figured out, okay, this is what we think is going on, this is why we think it's happening, then we're going to collect our baseline data. This is when we are thinking about, how do we want to measure this behavior? What are we most interested in measuring? And how do we set ourselves up to get some great data on what's happening before we even introduce the intervention? And this is really important so that we'll be able to tell at the end, did our intervention work? We've got to have that strong baseline data so we know. And then in step 4, which I don't know, step 2 and step 4 are like both my favorite. I don't know which one I like the most. Step 4 is very fun because that's when you build out the intervention. It's like very exciting. You get to think about, what do we know about this student? Can they perform the behavior? Is the environment set up with effective practices for them? And based on the answers to those 2 questions, you build out an intervention to support them. So this can be a really exciting step. This is also when you're connecting to get that pre-intervention social validity and some prepping for treatment integrity. And then step 5, we test the intervention. We put it in place and we see if it's working. And we're looking at 3 big pieces there. We're looking at student outcomes. So we continue collecting data just like we did in baseline. We keep collecting data. And what we hope is that that challenging behavior goes down and that replacement behavior goes up. We're looking at treatment integrity. And that means, is the intervention in place as intended? So we're building out this intervention. We're defining the characteristics that we want to see. And then we're asking ourselves, are we seeing those in the classroom? So if I'm the classroom teacher, I'm saying, every day, did I do these things? And then we have an outside observer come in about 25% of the time to say, am I seeing these things? And that's not a gotcha. It's an opportunity. It's kind of like a reminder of like, oh, these were the pieces of the intervention. And we need to know if they're happening, because we can't say that it doesn't work if we don't know if it happened. We've got to know, is this happening the way we designed? And if it's not, that's okay. We can make adjustments. And then finally, super important, social validity. And that's from the educator, that's from the family, and from the student. What do they think about the goals and the procedures and the outcomes of the intervention? So that's step 5 there. And don't worry, we're going to do a deep dive into every step so you don't have to remember everything I just said. But why is FABI effective? First and foremost, it is individualized for the student. It is rooted in the function of the behavior. Why is the behavior happening? And then we tailor the intervention based on that and based on what the environment needs. So it's really focused on what is unique about this student and their experience. How do we match an intervention to them and to their environment? It looks at skill building. It's pro-social behavior, right? Like we focus on that replacement behavior. It's got a more positive tone and twist to it. It's a step-by-step manualized process. All of the templates and checklists exist. So you'll be able to implement it with like higher rates of fidelity. It's there for you to support your team as you adopt this process. And I think most importantly, it's team-based. This is about the family and the educator and the student coming together and finding a solution together, which is just going to increase the social validity. Like my level of investment and belief in this working is usually a lot higher when I've been involved in the process of building it. So when you're thinking about your team, because that's what's really unique about this, is it's a team-based approach. There's a couple different members. So typically there's two people who are like standing members, meaning they're always on the FABI team. And that's usually someone from your Ci3T leadership team. So that could be a principal, an assistant principal, a counselor, a special ed teacher, a gen ed teacher, anyone on your leadership team. And then usually a staff member with some behavioral expertise. So maybe a behavior specialist or an instructional coach or a school psychologist, social workers, counselors, people who have a lot of experience with behavior. Then you'll have the classroom teacher of the student. And especially if they're in maybe middle or high school and have multiple teachers, it's great to have multiple teachers reflected here. At least one family member for the student, and the student themselves is also on this team. So when you think about benefits and challenges, benefits, it's collaborative, it's team-based, it centers the voice and perspective of the student and the family and the educator. It has like a very, very strong evidence base. There's over 20 years of research testing this across age groups, across environments, across behaviors. Like, this is a strategy that works for kids and that is feasible for teachers. And there is lots and lots of real examples in real classrooms to show that. And it is fully manualized. Everything is there for you. It is like a grab and go in the sense of the templates and supports you need to go through this process. Things that are challenging, it is time and resource intensive, right? It is a tier 3 intervention. So you're not doing this for everyone. You're doing this for a very small number of students, probably just one student at a time. Because it is time and resource intensive. It takes time for the team to come together. It takes time to do those interviews and to do the ABC data. Those things take time, and that's what leads to a really strong product, is the time to collect the data and come together and talk and make a plan. It might also require some additional training, maybe on like how to collect data, how to do ABC data, different types of measurement systems. There's some training usually on the front end as people are learning. And it is a little bit of an adjustment from a more like traditional FBA bit practice. I know when I was in the classroom, when I was a SPED director, like when we had a kid who needed an FBA, like an outside person came in, they observed, they gave me a plan, and they were like, bye. And I was like, what? What's going on? Like, this is a team-based approach. The people who are building the plan are the same people who are implementing the plan. Families have a seat at the table. The student has a seat at the table, and that's really what makes it stand apart. All right, so let's pause for a moment and pop in the chat for me. What are your initial thoughts and reactions? What's a piece that stands out that you're maybe excited about or seems really feasible? Or maybe what's something that might be a little challenging about implementing? I'll give you about 30 seconds to think and pop that in the chat. Oh, don't I love that? That's fantastic. Yes, we are here to serve. We are trying to make this as feasible as possible. So we love hearing that. Yeah, right? Like, sometimes it felt like in special education, we had things that worked, and it's like, man, this would work for kids who don't have IEPs. And this is a way that you can translate something that we know works to a population of students who also needs it, but maybe just don't have those special education services. All right, you can keep popping those out in the chat. So we are now going to hop into a step-by-step overview of each of the steps. And what's going to happen is we'll do a little bit of talking, a little bit of highlighting. Here's what's happening in this step. And then we're going to get time to practice. So practice either by doing things in the chat or practicing in breakout rooms. So a little bit of talking, a little bit of practice. So hopefully it feels really interactive. And just again, we are so excited you're here. We're so excited to start sharing these highlights with you. And if this is something that you're like, hey, like I really want to implement this, I want to do this, or this is something we want to do next year, we'd invite you to check out some of these opportunities to learn more. So there's a FABI tab of our website that has a lot of great resources. Book is incredible. It's the only textbook I saved from graduate school, and I took a lot of classes. This is excellent. It is like not a textbook. It is written for educators. It's fantastic. And then there's this module series. So there's the intro module and then one for every step. So if you're interested in learning more, we definitely invite you to check out these resources. All right, step 1, identifying who might need a functional assessment-based intervention. There are 3 big pieces that are happening here. And what you see there on the left is the step 1 checklist. And that's just an example of how this is manualized for you. That's something you can download from our website. It's also featured in the book. And it just walks you through, here are the things that are happening during step 1 that you're then able to like edit as you're going through to help guide that team's process. So during the step, we're reviewing multiple sources of data, we're connecting with the family, and we're connecting with the student. When we think about data, again, we're going to start with that grid. If you're at a school that implements Ci3T, pull up that intervention grid and look and see what are those entry criteria. If you're at a school that does not yet use Ci3T, you're just going to think about what am I looking for? What are some of the markers that would tell me, oh, this student might be a good fit? Definitely going to be looking at screening data, office discipline referrals. We definitely want to check out attendance. If a student's not at school, it's going to be a little tricky to get an intervention in place that's likely to move the needle. We might first need to focus on how do I help you get to school? So it is really important that we look at attendance too. Might also be looking at suspensions, expulsion, things like that. And also that academic piece. We don't want to overlook that. Yes, the student, if they're getting this intervention, they have behavior that is getting our attention and needs intervention. They might also have academic needs, and that might be part of what's going on. So it's also important that we check out those data. Next, we want to connect with the family and then with the student. So when we connect with the student, we are going to follow our district procedures like we would for any Tier 3 intervention, where you're going to describe what FABI is and the role that the family would play. And then you might also explore other Tier 3 options. You might say, like, here's one option, and another option is an individualized de-escalation plan, or another option is something else that you have in your manual or your kind of arsenal of tools that you use. And then you want to secure permissions, just like you would for any other Tier 3 intervention. And then when you meet with the student, you explain to them what the FABI is and how they'll be involved in the process, and then just give them time to ask questions. All right, so step 2. We know who needs an intervention. We connected with the parent, we connected with the student, we're ready to go. Like we said, step 2 is all about information gathering, and there's a lot that happens in this step. This is about us understanding the learning environment. We're looking at records. We're interviewing the educator, the student, the family. This is where we really clearly define the behaviors that we're working on. We might do some rating scales. We collect ABC data, and we use a tool called the function matrix, and we identify that replacement behavior. There's a lot going on in this step, and today we're going to focus on these 3 areas. So first step, we're going to operationally define the behavior. So what you're seeing on the left side of your screen is the teacher interview form or the educator interview form. And in that interview, what you're going to do is you'll start by generating what are some of the challenging behaviors the student exhibits. And the teacher's going to tell you, these are all the things they do that are really, really challenging right now. And then you'll prioritize that list. And then you're going to keep narrowing it down until you get to 1. What is the one behavior that if we were able to move the needle on that, decrease that challenging behavior or increase a more positive replacement behavior, that would really change that student's experience with us, that would make them feel more successful, that would set them up for success. It's about narrowing down to 1. And once you have that behavior, you operationally define it. And this is when we're setting up a really clear, concise definition that is objective. It means that anyone can use it. I can walk into the room, I'm going to see and know, is this happening, yes or no? And it's so clear you can give to anyone to do that. It's going to have these 4 components. It's going to have a label, which is what we call it, academic engagement, tattling, calling out of seat, whatever the behavior is called. Then it has a definition, this is what it is, and then a list of examples and a list of non-examples. And this helps make sure that what we're doing, it's objective and it's observable, it's unambiguous, anyone can understand the definition and apply it. Doesn't leave a lot of room for that subjectivity. So loud, well, what I consider loud might not be what you consider loud, or inappropriate. Well, what makes something inappropriate? I'm going to make sure you're using really clear quantifiers, so we're all on the same page about what it means to be loud. And then that last one is about describing an action instead of an inaction. Sometimes it's called the dead man's test. If a dead person can do it, that's not what we're going to include. So you wouldn't say not raising your hand. A dead person cannot raise their hand. You would use the action, which is shouting out. That's what they're doing. A dead person cannot shout out, hopefully. So operational definition, here's an example with off task. So that label, we're calling it off task. The definition, it's attending to activities in class other than the assignment. Examples would be using materials inappropriately, talking to your peer, putting your head down, drawing, looking around the room. And then non-examples would be doing the assignment, using the materials only for their intended purpose, watching the teacher, or kind of looking at a peer if you're having a peer conversation. Another example might be if we're talking about verbal aggression. That could be any vocalization directed towards a peer or an adult at a volume above expected conversational level for a given setting, use of profanity or language that's not appropriate. So examples, yelling "I hate you" at a voice level 3 during classroom instruction. So that's different than yelling loudly. We know at our school what a level 3 means, so that's kind of the quantifier that goes there. And then your non-examples, using a level 3 at recess. That's a great time to be at level 3. Negative self-talk. This is too hard. That's not an example of verbal aggression. When we think about ABC data collection, we're looking at something that's called direct observation. Here it's called ABC data collection. What this is you're going into the classroom, you're looking at the antecedent. That's what happens before the behavior. You're looking at the behavior, and you're looking at the consequence, what happened right after. And consequence, it doesn't mean like, sometimes we think of like punishment, the way it's talked about, the punishment of like, oh, you got sent to the office. Consequence is just whatever happened after the behavior. So if I tell a joke and people laugh, that's a consequence. If I tell a joke and nobody laughs and it's awkward, that's a consequence. Those are both consequences. It happened after the behavior. And then based on that, we can assign a function. We can try to figure out like I can't even put a word together. Like, what a function is this for us? How is this serving the student? Because all behavior is serving the student in a certain way. We just need to figure out how and why. So what this looks like, and this zooms in on the next page, so it's nice and big for you, but first up, we decide what part of the day we're going to observe. So you're looking for the time of day where that target behavior, that challenging behavior that you're trying to reduce, where that happens a lot. So we find that time of day, and we want to make sure we observe at least 3 times. And we're hoping that we'll get to see like 8 to 10 instances of the behavior. And if not, we want to make sure we get at least 3 hours. And the reason we're doing that is we just want to make sure we've observed long enough to pick up on any patterns. We want to have as many examples as we can get of what this behavior looks like in the classroom. And we're only looking for that target behavior. So sometimes, you're in classrooms and you like write down everything that's happening. This is, you're just eagle eyes looking for that behavior that we're focusing on. So if you're focusing on profanity, you're only taking data when that student swears. You are not taking data when they're out of their seat or they're off task or, calling their friend a name. Like, we're just looking at profanity. And then the last one is every instance then is going to get put on our function matrix. So that's why we do each one separately. So when you zoom in on that form, what you see there at the top is that kind of name and date, all those important details, so we can keep all these straight, because you're going to have a couple of these forms that you're going to be using later. So we want to make sure we have those details. And the first piece here is you'll notice there's rows. And each row is one instance of the behavior. So one time the behavior occurred. And the reason they're all in separate rows is because each one is going to go on the matrix. Then there's the context. That's just like what's happening. So reading instruction, whole group instruction, the do now, partner work, small group work, just what's happening. The antecedent is what happened right before the behavior. So maybe a teacher gave a direction. In this case, a pencil broke. It could be that a peer called their name and tried to get their attention. What happened right before the behavior? Then what was the behavior? In this case, the student threw the pencil. And then the consequence, what happened? In this case, the teacher looked at the student. It could be peers laughed. It could be they got ignored. It could be they got sent to the principal's office. Whatever happened right after the behavior. And then later, you fill in that function column. In the moment, you don't fill it in, you fill it in later. So what's going to happen after is we get to take all of the information we've gathered, and we're going to put it into this function matrix. And this is one of the really cool and unique things about functional assessment-based intervention. So the function matrix was developed by John Umbright and colleagues, and it is a way to organize all this information that you've gathered. And the way it's set up, it's like super practical. Each column is a type of reinforcement. So the first column is positive reinforcement, that's accessing something. And then the second column is negative reinforcement, that's getting to avoid or escape something. And then the rows are the like types of something. So you can access or avoid attention. You can access or avoid activities or tangibles, and access and avoid sensory. And just to give you an idea of what some of those might look like, is for attention, accessing attention would look like peers laughing, or a teacher providing one-on-one assistance, or a teacher giving a redirection. If I shout out and the teacher tells me, hey, don't do that, that's still attention. So that would fall under accessing attention, positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, getting to avoid or escape, could look like working alone, can look like being ignored by peers or adults. So if I shout out and nobody responds to me, that is like negative reinforcement. I'm not receiving it, avoiding, escaping. Tangibles are activities, like a preferred activity, like a tablet, or maybe a favorite center, toy, sticker, food, that all falls in this category. The negative reinforcement, getting to avoid or escape, is like not having to do an academic task. So if I get sent to the principal's office, I don't have to do the worksheet. If I get a homework pass, I don't have to do that. I get a break card, I get a little break. I don't have to do the thing I was doing. A skip the lunch line pass, that's getting to escape or avoid something non-preferred. And then sensory, that can look like accessing fidgets, or negative reinforcement could be like avoiding noise with those noise canceling headphones. So when we think about what this looks like, kind of plotted out, this is an example here. We took some quotes from the teacher interview and the parent interview. We've got our ABC data. And the way, if you're like, whoa, what are those numbers? That first number is just what observation it was, what day. So that 1.2 means the first day, and the 2 just means the occurrence. So like which row on the form was that? So 2.4 means the second observation day, and it's the fourth time the behavior occurred. And the reason why we set it this way is just so you can visually see like where is our information falling. And that's going to help us figure out what might be the function. We're now going to do a little bit of practice together. So get your chat open and ready. I'm going to read each row across. And then in the chat, you're going to type in what you think the function is. So remember, those functions are to positive reinforcement, access, attention, activities, tangible, sensory, or negative reinforcement, avoid, attention, tangibles, activities, sensory. So in this first one, it's during the do now. The teacher instructs the class to work on their do now. It's a journal writing. The student is doodling in their notebook. And the consequence is they stop doodling, they look up when the teacher calls on a peer. What is the function of that behavior, of the doodling? All right. So we had it listed as escape or avoid an activity, that negative reinforcement, because by doodling, I am escaping, avoiding the do now, that journal writing activity. I think you could say like, yeah, I'm getting to access an activity I do like. I like to doodle. So I think I could definitely see both for sure. But we're definitely avoiding doing our do now. The second one was a peer sharing their response. The student is playing on their phone. They continue to play on their phone until they're called on. This one is an example of accessing an activity, so positive reinforcement, accessing, getting to play on their phone. That is a preferred activity. And by doing that, they are escaping, avoiding that negative reinforcement, the activity that they don't want to do, which is the do now. All right, this next one. The teacher is discussing the do now responses, so they're going through all their responses. And the student is physically turned in their seat, facing the wall, looking away from the board. The consequence is they orient their body towards it after 40 seconds. What is the function of their behavior? That physically turning, looking away. Nice. Yep. I'm seeing lots of avoids. We'd agree. Escape that activity, avoid that activity. That's negative reinforcement. All right. Option 4. We're in whole group. The teacher's now lecturing. They're introducing a new topic. The student's computer is open and they're playing a game. As a consequence, they continue to play the game on the computer until they are given their assignment for independent work. Go ahead and type, but don't hit send yet. Playing on the computer, what is the function of that? You guys are crushing it. Fantastic. Yep, so we had access and activity. So playing on the computer is very fun, maybe very preferred. We like that. And then also getting to escape, avoid the lecture, right? Like maybe that's a non-preferred activity. Sitting and listening to my teacher is a non-preferred activity. Nice job. All right, last one. So now independent work time. The student's working on their independent work. They're answering questions from the textbook. They turn to a peer and they start talking about orchestra rehearsal. The peer engages, so they're talking back, and they talk for 30 seconds before they get back to work. What is the function of that behavior, that turning to their peer and talking? Yep, we would agree. So we've got access attention, so that positive reinforcement with accessing my peer attention by having that conversation. And because I'm having a conversation, I'm also escaping or avoiding the activity, which is that independent work, those textbook questions. So when you're kind of thinking about what's going on here, we're thinking about, are you trying to access positive reinforcement or avoid negative reinforcement? And what is it? Access attention, access activities tangibles, access sensory. Same for avoid.
That's such a great explanation, Elise, and exactly right. So when you're thinking about it's either positive or negative reinforcement, access or avoid, and then attention. And then I do want to mention, I remember asking John Umbright in the early years when we were developing the function matrix, why he thought that those should stay grouped together, like why not separate tangible and task. And at the time, the logic was and still is that kids want something, presumably to interact with it, like to play with it or enjoy it in some capacity. So that's why they're grouped together. And we often get that question about why are those yoked? And that's the why. And just like what Elise was saying, sometimes it is both sides of a coin. Like I might want to wear earphones in a cafeteria to block out, to avoid the noise, and I also might be listening to more calm music in those same headphones, which is allowing me to access something more peaceful. So great activity, and I think it's important to play these types of things with the team before starting that process so that we can all get on the same page. Thanks, Elise.
Definitely. All right. So once you've filled out your matrix, so you have all of the evidence you've collected from your interviews and your records reviews and your ABC data, you've put it in the matrix, you're going to look and you're going to see like where is like the preponderance of evidence, like which boxes are biggest. And that is going to tell you the like hypothesized function. Sometimes there's one box and it's like, oh my gosh, almost everything is in that box. And maybe that means there's just one function. Sometimes there's two boxes that have a lot of data in there. And that means there's two functions happening. And that happens a lot. And that's what's really awesome about the function matrix is it gives you like a systematic way to think about this. Because sometimes it's easy to be like, oh, they're like attention seeking. Like they want attention. That's why they're doing it. It's definitely attention. It definitely could be. And sometimes it's attention and escaping an activity. And we don't know that until we like zoom out and really look. So what's cool about the matrix, it lets you like zoom out and look. And then what you do is that from that information, you come up with that hypothesized function. So you're able to say, during independent reading activities, which is the context, the student, Frank, what do? He engages in non-compliant behavior. And why? He does that to escape too difficult tasks and to access peer and teacher attention. So those are the two functions. That is why this behavior is happening. And this is such an important step because this drives everything that happens next. So getting this statement to be as accurate as possible is what lets us develop a plan that is really tailored to the student's needs. All right, so what we're going to do now is in a moment, we'll open up breakout rooms. And in your room, you're going to practice filling out a function matrix. So we've got some data for you, some examples of what someone might say in an interview and examples of what might happen during direct observation and ABC data. And you're going to put those on a function matrix so you get a chance to practice here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I hope that was a helpful opportunity to start applying that skill. I saw like lots of interesting conversations about, well, where does this go? And does this go in two places? So the purpose of that was just to get your feet wet. And if you're like, oh, I want to know more, again, we've got that FABI tab, we've got the book, and there's a whole module on step 2 that we definitely recommend you check out for more opportunities to learn. So thank you for jumping in and being so involved. All right, we're on step 3 now. We've identified the behavior we want to measure. And now we're going to figure out how are we going to measure it. So as you can see here, there's a lot of pieces that go into step 3. We're going to determine the behavioral dimension to focus on. We're going to select our measurement system. We're going to set up different data collection procedures. So setting up the forms, scheduling those observations, figuring out who's going to do it. We're going to train up our data collectors. I think someone mentioned this earlier, the importance of getting people trained so that we're collecting data consistently and accurately, and then collecting and graphing that baseline data. So again, there's a lot that happens in step 3. We're going to focus on these first 2 today. So first up, behavioral dimensions. So when you think about your behavior, you want to think about what dimension or kind of like what part of that behavior do we really want to focus on. So first up, you might consider fluency. And that's just how many times the behavior occurs. So if you're thinking about like tantruming, this would just be like how many tantrums happen. 12 a day, 1 a day, 17 in an hour. Well, that would be rate actually, but 17 in a day. That would just frequency. How many times does this happen? Rate is the number of times it happens per like a unit of time. So like in the example here, during a 30-minute observation, the student initiated social interactions at a rate of 3 times per minute. So it's just like a time-bound frequency. Next up, we then think about duration. So that's how long a behavior occurs. So if you think about that tantruming example, I'm not interested in how many tantrums a student has. I want to know how long are they? Do they last 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 18 minutes? That's that duration. And latency is the time between like an antecedent or like when a request is made, like pick up your pencil, go to your seat, and when the student actually does that. So maybe I say, let's get started, and one student starts within 2 seconds and one student takes 4 minutes. And then the last one is force. That's that strength or the intensity. So like writing so hard it leaves a mark on a paper. So first, before you pick the type of measurement system, you want to think about the dimension of behavior, because that's going to tell you what type of system might be the best fit. So let's quickly do a few examples. I'm going to read an example, and you're going to tell me the dimension that matches. And I put that infographic there to hopefully be helpful. Again, those dimensions are frequency, rate, duration, latency, and force. So for that first one, Susan worked math problems for 15 minutes. Check you out.
You go!
Crushing it. All right. Jessica initiated use of her communication device 6 times. Yep. Frequency, 6 times. It happened 6 times. All right, our next one. Once directed to return to his seat, it took 7 minutes for Charlie to leave the beanbag in the class reading area. What dimension would that be? You got it, latency. Yep, that's that time between when you ask the student to do something and when they actually did it. That's latency. All right, last one. Levi completed 4 math problems in 10 minutes. What dimension is that? You got it. Rate. Yep, because it's time bound. That in that 10 minutes. You got it. Fantastic. Okay, so first you decide what's the dimension I'm interested in, and then you decide what type of measurement system fits this behavior, matches that dimension, and is going to be feasible for the educator and the team to collect. So there's a lot of choice here. So the first type of measurement system is event-based. And this is great for frequency and rate. There are two. You can do frequency or you can do rate. And this is best for behaviors that are countable and discrete. So what that means is things that are pretty short, they have a really clear start and stop, and they're uniform in length, meaning they take about the same amount of time. So examples are like talking out of turn, like calling out, swearing, pushing, something that's just like very discrete. You can see it happen. It's quick, has a really clear start and end. And when you're doing event-based recording, you're going to select a certain time to collect that data. And you want to make sure that you collect data at the same time, consistently, the same setting, so that we're able to it's like apples and apples instead of apples and oranges. So for example, the first 20 minutes of the day, during recess, during math block, or even more specifically, like the first 20 minutes of your math block, or the partner and independent work of your math block. So pick that time of day that you're going to focus on. And then in these types of recordings, you're going to keep track every time the behavior occurs during that time. So ways that educators are doing this is like tally marks. So that could be on a Post-it, on a label, on a data collection sheet, but just like tallies. Another option is moving like paper clips or some type of item from one pocket to another every time the behavior occurs, or using those like counters every time the behavior occurs. So those are just a couple different ways that you can do that. So we're going to practice event-based recording, and we're going to do frequency recording. So just how many times does this behavior occur? And there is a handout that goes with this. So you're going to go back to where you downloaded the handout for that last activity. You go to ci3t.org/pl. You go to that green accordion, session 5 or 7. Sorry, we're in session 7. It's the last one, session 7. And it's handout number 2. Thanks, Carrie. She just popped in the chat for you. It's handout number 2, measurement practice. And I'll give you time to download that while I'm talking. What we're going to do is we're going to watch this video, Jim Gaffigan, and the target behavior is when he says cake. So the definition is saying cake is defined as any time Jim says the word cake. Examples are cake, and non-examples are you guys, chocolate, breakfast. And what you're going to do is just you can tally. You can use that handout. If you're like, I'd rather just use a scratch piece of paper, totally fine. You're just going to tally, make a mark every time he says cake. I'm going to give you about another 10-ish seconds just to either get a piece of paper and a pencil or something, or to download that handout. All right, I'm going to press play. You're keeping track of how many times does Jim say cake.
My favorite dessert is cake. Yeah. Cake's a true symbol of gluttony, though. If you eat a whole pizza, people are like, wow, you were hungry. But if you eat a whole cake, people are like, you got a problem. Addicted to cake. It's not like drinking. You never hear someone brag, yeah, last night I had 4 pieces of cake. Why are you telling us? Just want you to know I partied. Why don't you get away from me? Because everyone knows cake's bad for us. Sometimes we try and disguise the fact we're eating cake. It's breakfast, I can't have cake. I'll have a muffin. You know the difference between a cake and a muffin? Nothing. A muffin is a bald cupcake. And we know it. Have you seen the mini muffins? How much denial are we in when we're eating mini muffins? Oh, I'm just going to have like 1 or 12. So small they don't really count. They're like muffin vitamins. When I eat them, I feel like an astronaut. I have them for breakfast. Can't have cake for breakfast. Unless it's a pancake. How'd that slide through? Young man, you're not having cake for breakfast. You're having fried cake with syrup for breakfast. I'll load up on that and try not to nap. Pancakes. Pancakes definitely make you lower your expectations. You're like, well, looks like I'm not showering today. I'm going to be digesting those carb cakes for hours. That was a bad idea. This guy talks a lot about cake. Cake's a powerful food. Cake can actually bring people together. It's Bill's birthday. I hate that guy. There's cake in the conference room. Well, I should say hello. See how he's doing. I mean, admit it, when you hear the song Happy Birthday, all you're thinking is, hey, I'm getting some free cake. During the song, you're just wondering what kind it is. Hope it's chocolate for me.
Okay, so I'll give you time. Count up your tallies. And when you're ready, go ahead and pop it in the chat. How many times did Jim say cake? I had 18. He said cake 18 times is what I counted. And I think what we notice is we're seeing a span of answers, and that is totally normal. That is why we practice doing observations, like we practice with our definition, we practice measuring, we get reliable with the other people around us, because this is totally normal. And this is already coming up. What about that was challenging? I'm seeing in the chat, like, I didn't know if I should count cupcake or pancake, like, did those count? That is a perfect example of why we have those examples and non-examples in the definition. That's something we'd want to go and revise. We'd want to go back and say, okay, we're not counting cupcake or pancake, and we would put those in non-examples. This is a perfect example. Oh, see, plural and singular, I didn't even think about that. That's a great one. So like, that's the importance of having that really clear operational definition. Fantastic. What else, if anything, was challenging about that recording? You can put it in the chat.
I think for me, and I know I've watched this a million times and done it in trainings, but still I get caught up in what I'm watching and I forget to count. And it reminds me about the importance of actually taking the time to practice in a classroom rather than just like noticing, oh, what a cool bulletin board, or this kid's doing this thing over here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he talks fast. He goes fast. He says it a lot. Like, that's a short clip, and he says it at least 18 times. Yeah, it's fast. And that's a good example of thinking about in the real world, when you're actually collecting data. We know you're not watching Jim Gaffigan. You might think, like, if a student is doing a behavior a lot, frequency might not be the best way to capture that. It just might be too challenging. And the other thing I was thinking of is, I know we're on Zoom, but like maybe the audio was hard to hear. And in the classroom, you want to think about, am I seated in a place that I can see and hear what I need to? And those are some things that we can think about when we want to, which is why we practice. We practice when we get reliable with whoever else is taking data. And that just gives us a chance to try things out, kind of work out the kinks and figure out how to do even better. So we practice an event-based system. So frequency and rate, those are kind of when you're keeping tallies, every single behavior is counted in those. And our time-based methods, that's duration, latency, and the different types of interval recording, we're not counting every single time. So these types of systems are really great for behaviors that are not countable or not discrete. And by that, we mean they have like a less defined start and end. So it would be a little bit hard to do a really clear start and end, or they might span a period of time, or there's a lot of variety in how long they last. So some examples are like academic engagement, off task, leaving a designated area, tantruming. Those are all things that could be really great for these time-based systems. And when we're doing time-based recording, first we're going to talk about duration and latency. Again, you want to pick that specific period when you're collecting data. We want to make sure we're consistent day over day, that we're collecting data in the same time and same place. And when you're doing duration or latency, you're going to use a stopwatch or like an app on your phone or your watch. And if you're doing duration, you're keeping track of when behavior starts and stops. So I'm on task, start the timer. I'm off task, stop the timer. If you're doing latency, it would be teacher gives a direction, pick up your pencil and start writing, start the timer, stop it when the student picks up and starts writing. For interval recording, again, pick that time and place that you're going to observe, and then you're going to divide that up into intervals, equal intervals. So 30 seconds, 1 minute intervals, these short periods of time. So if I did a 30-minute period, it would be 31-minute intervals or 60 30-second intervals. And then you set up a cue that's going to go off at the end of each interval. So that can be like an audio cue. There's lots of apps on like phones and watches. There's little motivators. It's like a little device that like gives you a little buzz at the end of the interval. Yes, David, make sure it's an interval app, definitely. So it's going to give you some type of cue, either audio or like a physical vibration at the end of the interval. And if you're doing whole interval recording, in order to say, yes, the behavior occurred, it had to happen the whole time. So if we're talking about on task and I have a 1 minute interval, you're only going to check, yes, the student was on task if they were on task the whole minute. For a partial interval, if the behavior occurred any time in the interval, it's a yes. So if I was on task for the first 2 seconds and then I was off task for 58 seconds, it's still a yes because I was on task at some point in that interval. And then momentary time sampling is at the exact moment of the interval. So when you hear the ding or you get the buzz, at that exact moment you look up, are they doing it, yes or no? So it doesn't matter if the whole time I was on task, if when you look up I'm not on task, it'd be a no. So those are kind of those different types. Momentary time sampling tends to be like one of the more feasible ones for educators because it's a quick look up. Is it happening? Yes or no? As opposed to whole and partial are a little more time consuming. So again, we didn't talk through each of these pieces, but we did just think it's really important to say these are the 2 pieces we talked through, but there are other components of step 3 that are super important. And the module does have, as well as the book, additional support for you to implement that with like templates and different practice activities. But thinking about, we got to develop those procedures, we have to train people, and we got to collect and graph that baseline data. All right, moving into step 4. This is the fun one. So when you design the intervention. Again, with step 4, there are a lot of components that are happening. Right now, we're just going to focus on the first 4. So when we're thinking about step 4, designing the intervention, the first thing we're going to do is use this function-based intervention decision model. And this is another tool that's unique to this model. It's unique to FABI, just like the function matrix is unique to FABI, developed by Unbright and colleagues. And this helps us pick the right method based on the situation. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask and answer 2 questions. The first question is, can the student perform the replacement behavior? Yes or no? Then the second question is, do the antecedent conditions, so the environment, what's happening in the environment, does that represent effective practices for this student? Yes or no? And based on the answers to that, you end up with one of these methods. So can the student perform the replacement behavior? No, maybe the student does not know how to get the teacher attention in an effective way, in an expected way, like raising hands or some type of system, so they're blurting out. No, they don't know that. Do antecedent conditions represent effective practices? They do. Then we go with method 1, teach the replacement behavior. So you're asking and answering those 2 questions to figure out which method do I need to use. And once you do that, you're going to develop these ARE components. And all of the methods are going to have ARE components. So A stands for antecedent adjustment, and that's adjusting the antecedent conditions, the environment, to make it more likely that that replacement behavior will occur. And if you need to teach the replacement behavior. So those can be things like in the physical setting, like changing seats or like visual cues, posters, teaching the student the intervention, or teaching the student the skill. It can be things like self-monitoring. Those are things we're doing in the environment to set the student up for success, to make it more likely the replacement behavior will happen. And then the next piece is reinforcement shifts. So that's making sure we reinforce the replacement behavior to strengthen it so it happens more. So we want to give lots of praise for it. If you use like a universal reinforcer like ticket, you'd want to give tickets for showing the replacement behavior. And then extinction procedures is when we make sure that target behavior, that's that challenging behavior we're trying to decrease, we make sure that no longer gets reinforcement. Because currently the student is doing it because they are getting reinforced, right? I'm blurting out because I am getting teacher attention when I do it. So to put that on extinction means when I blurt out, you're not giving me attention. And that includes telling me like, stop, raise your hand, things like that. So let's go into some more examples. So antecedent, changes in the environment. That can look like greeting students. That can look like pairing students up, changing their seat, posters, something on the student's desk, those visual cues, and modeling expectations to the class. Reinforcement includes like behavior-specific praise. That can include break cards, like a student can earn a break. Giving them, I love this last one, giving a student time to tell a pre-approved joke. If they're really motivated by peer attention, that could be a great way to do it. And then the last one is extinction. So that might mean not giving that like verbal attention. So maybe it's just nonverbals, like tapping their worksheet where they need to work, or it's praising other students who are doing kind of what's expected. So in this next section, we're just going to go through a brief illustration just to show you what this looks like, kind of all put together. This is going to be about David, and this comes from an article, Germer and colleagues, and this is a real student, happened in a real classroom, and it just kind of shows here's what this looks like when it's all put in place. So the target behavior was off task. That's what they wanted to reduce. And then there's definition, and then there's examples and non-examples. The replacement behavior was on task. We wanted to see him be able to engage more effectively with the tasks. Now, I do not expect you to be able to read this, don't worry, but this is just a screenshot of what that function matrix looked like. And this is to show you how this tool really helps you visually see. You don't need to be able to read all the details to look at this and be like, oh yeah, I'm thinking this student probably, the function is likely that positive reinforcement, access, attention, because look at all the examples we're seeing here, the ABC data, but also from interviews, and negative reinforcement or avoiding activities and tangibles. That is what they noticed. They said, all right, so when he's given a task, he engages in off-task behavior to access attention and to escape tasks. So the next thing they did was they said, all right, let's get our function-based intervention decision model. And they said, can he perform the replacement behavior? And they decided, yes, he can be on task. He has the ability. He has shown us he can do the work. He can be on task. Do the antecedent conditions represent effective practices for this student? Not yet. So you kind of like, it's kind of like graphing, where you like start with fun and then you meet in the middle. So we would use method 2. We're going to adjust the environment. We're going to change the antecedent conditions so that the student is likely to be more successful. So for measurement, they said, we're going to do duration. We're interested in how long is the student engaged. And we're going to do 20-minute sessions. And we're going to do, it's during their instructional time in the morning. So for antecedent adjustments, they did a seating change, and I've got that on the next slide for you. They have a stoplight system, which is also described in another slide. They did self-monitoring, and then the teacher would review a picture schedule for the morning with David before the work period. So that's an antecedent adjustment because it's happening like in the environment before. It's something the teacher's doing really proactively to support the child. And then the teacher is going to check in with David at the beginning of independent tasks to make sure he understands. So that's something the teacher is changing about their behavior that is setting up David to be more successful. So here's an example of how his seat changed. So before he was like off to the side and facing towards the bookshelf. And now that like dark gray, he's more towards the front. He's closer to the teacher. He's with the class and like facing the same direction as his peers. And they developed this stoplight system. So it was right on his desk. He was an elementary student. He was in 2nd grade. And it had a little clothespin, and he could put it on green if he was like good to go, yellow if he needs some help and he could talk to a friend, and red is like, I need help. Please come help me now. And then he had like an all done to signal he was done. Then we looked at reinforcement, and they said, okay, the teacher's going to provide behavior-specific praise when he's on task. So that's great. The more praise he gets, the more likely he is to engage in that behavior, because we know he is like motivated by attention. When that matrix, we saw like attention works for him. Accessing attention works for him. And then thinking about when he's done with work completion, he's going to get praise and take a break. Now that's important because if you remember on his function matrix, he's also really motivated by that negative reinforcement, that avoid, that escape of activities and tangibles. So that getting to take a break is a way he earns that for doing the right thing. So because you were so engaged, now you can take a break. I'm more likely to be engaged and on task if I know I'm going to get that break. And then at the very end, the teacher's going to help David do his self-monitoring and write one instance of good behavior. That's getting at that attention piece. He's getting this positive one-on-one interaction with his teacher. And then we're going to extinguish the target behavior. So the off task, that's not going to work anymore to get attention, and that's not going to work anymore to escape your activity. So we're not going to give him praise or attention when he's off task. We'll give like one verbal redirect, one gestural prompt. And when he is off task, we're going to focus on the other students. We're going to praise others. We're not engaging in this anymore. That's no longer going to function. It's no longer going to work. So once you've identified those components, you've figured out your ARE components, we then put those on a treatment integrity form. And again, treatment integrity is this in place as planned, as we designed it? And this is just telling us, is it happening? And we want people to be honest, it is not a gotcha. It is okay. You'll notice on here, on Monday, there was no instructional choice. That was not happening, and that's okay. If we see that every single day there is not happening, that's an opportunity for us to get curious and for us to go talk with the teacher and say, hey, I'm noticing that it seems like instructional choice has been a little tricky to get in place. What's going on? The teacher might tell you, yeah, fun fact, I don't know how to do that. I need help. Or they might say like, yeah, that isn't going to work. I can't figure it out. It's too much. Either way, you're going to get information about how do we move this forward? Do we need to make an adjustment? How can I help you? Can I teach you how to do this? Let's show you some low lift ways to do it. But the treatment integrity forum helps drive us. It helps us see, is this happening? So we can celebrate it. If it's not, we can make adjustments. And it's what's going to let us know if our intervention is working. Because if our intervention isn't working, but our treatment integrity is pretty low, that doesn't tell me the intervention isn't working. The intervention's not yet in place fully. And we want to make sure the intervention is fully in place before we're making decisions about is this working or not. And then last, but definitely not least, is this pre-intervention social validity. So we want to make sure that before we start the intervention, we talk to the teacher, we talk to the student, and we talk to the family. And there are some tools here that are embedded in the modules. The IRT-15 is a great, super quick survey that they fill out that just tells you, like, here's what I think about the goals and the outcomes and the procedures, what you're planning to do. And this is important because if a kid tells you, I'm not doing self-monitoring, that's so embarrassing, I will not have that on my desk, absolutely not. I would not recommend doing self-monitoring. Like, they've already told you they're not going to do that. That's a chance to be like, okay, thanks for letting me know. Let's figure out what we can do instead. Now, should we do it on, what if we did it online? What if I gave you a folder, right? Like, it lets us kind of work out some of the things that could get in the way ahead of time. Now, usually social validity is a little easier in this case because the parent and the student and the teacher were all part of the process. So they probably built something that they think is going to work. Okay, now we get to do some fun practice. So in a moment, you'll be whisked back to your rooms. And when you're in there, you are going to work to develop ARE components for another case study student. So enjoy your time, and I can't wait to see you when you get back.
Great. Thank you so much. And let's everybody give a shout out to Elise. Great presenting, really fun. And thank you for putting this together. This is one of our favorite topics. So thank you guys very much. And what a fun activity. It was fun to pop into the different rooms to watch people brainstorming those ideas for like what antecedent adjustments can we do? What reinforcement shifts can we make? And how can we put behavior on extinction? Knowing very well that extinction by itself is in a classroom is very, very challenging to do because it's difficult to manage all the contingencies. But once that's all drafted, then we are in our very last step where we get to actually test the intervention. And when we talk about testing the intervention, it's testing that full package. So when it's decided upon, these are the antecedent adjustments, the reinforcement shifts, and the extinction components. And this is very important. There's plans for how you get input from everybody that's involved, from the teacher that's going to do it, from the family members if they have a role, at a minimum to get their input on what it's going to look like, and the students themselves. And that essentially becomes the thing that you do. And if you already have the luxury of working in a school, doing Ci3T or another tiered system, all that stays exactly the same. We're adding this in. So it's not like you're taking this kid out and doing this thing to them. This becomes part of what they're doing. And that is why I was so excited. I got to go to almost every breakout room and people talked about doing behavior specific praise. And I want to make the point, you would use the same acknowledgement system, like the same ticket that you use for the school-wide aspect. And I'm watching David nod his head. He's heard this 1,000 times because we want to make sure we're programming for generalization so they learn this is the thing we want to see more of.
One of our attendees talked about, and not only doing that, but looking at what's happening in the classroom and incorporating that. So we looked at tried and true strategies, but we also considered what's the teachers doing? Let's build that into the plan.
Yeah, that's great. And a lot of times there are excellent things that are already happening that we want to solidify as part of the intervention. So like if a teacher does things, I saw you connect them to instructional choice, Eric. So like if it might be that an antecedent-based adjustment is two different journal prompts, they can pick one to do. That's something that the teacher may do regularly. We just want to solidify that as part of the plan. And when it is done and you put that intervention in place, like everything else, we need to know which pieces are happening. And if there's days we miss a part, that's okay. We'll keep track of that. And we want to look at the data to see what the impact is. And then some people will think, oh, this is a research thing, but hear me out. This is not a research thing. A life thing is that you need to test that intervention. You've got the baseline data that Elise talked to you about in step 3. Then you're going to put this intervention in place. And if it's something that can be withdrawn, like if it's a performance deficit, meaning a doesn't want to do, like a problem of motivation, essentially, you can actually take that entire intervention away for a very short period of time, like 3 to 5 days, and then put it back in. That's an A/B test. And we need to do some type of a test to see, is it truly that intervention that is changing the behavior of the kid, or is it something else? But if it is something that the child has learned and it's a new skill, we will not be able to completely withdraw that. So we might have to do something like a changing criterion design. But the point is, there has to be some test. Doing baseline and the intervention is not enough. And if you were to go to due process and you could show them, I did this intervention and I tested it. We collected baseline. I put the whole thing in place. I took it away and I put it back in again. And this is what did work or did not work. That is legally defensible. And us have done excellent work to help make those connections for people to see this intervention, like the one I'm showing you right now for Harry. This isn't a good example of something that has very practical things, just like Eric was talking about, that allow you to get this in place in a classroom and legitimately test it. And I'd like to show this one because I'd like you to look at the dates. Keep in mind, today is 4/29/2025. This was an intervention done by Meredith Cox, who is now Meredith Crittenden. This was an actual intervention where she was taking this class at a university to learn how to do it. The 5/28 was the last day of school for this kid. And you might think, why would anybody start a functional assessment based intervention this late in the school year? When they went in, they saw somewhat high levels of engagement, at least moderate. And then it's like dating, and I think this is like marriage, right? Behavior settles back down into very typical things. Then, when the intervention was in place, on this one day, there was a substitute teacher and there was a breach in implementation. They put the intervention back in place, and again, academic engagement plummeted, and they put it in place. This teacher was expecting, and the very last month of her pregnancy, and she's like, I don't want to wait till next year. I need something now. And the benefit is when this kid finished the school year, they knew what worked in this context for this kid. And I love this illustration. It's real. It did happen. It was not overly complicated, super practical, and it worked. So as you're wrapping up and thinking about this, and this is one of our passions. I know Wendy and Oaks and I have done trainings on this for many, many years, and Eric Common and David have participated in randomized control trials. Mark's been a big part of this work. So this is like a real passion for us because, and yes, I agree, David, great illustration about the importance of treatment integrity on that dip. But we want to find something that works. And so there are many different approaches to functional assessment-based intervention. This is one that we believe really works well and is very practical for a teacher to do. So as you're thinking about places that you might want to continue to grow or learn or check things out, I want to tell you that I continue to be deeply, deeply appreciative of the opportunity for the funding that allows us to bring bring us to you on these days. We are all good to go for next year for Project Empower. And thanks to this amazing team. And I want to say this is the last year it will be referred to as Project Empower Plus. I'm giving you that as a plug, David, to make a public commitment that that plus sign will go away. These are all the topics that we've already got on deck for next year. And if you wanted to today, before you log off, this is on our professional learning website. And thank you for the feedback. One of the pieces of feedback, we literally read every single comment the first Friday of our coaching meeting after every one of these. And some of the feedback from the Empower sessions is people are like, I don't want to have to register so many times. So now for next year, if you scan that QR code, you can go in and sign up for any of the ones that you'd like. And you'll see there's 6-step process. We're going to do FABI again next year. So know that these are coming. And if you are somebody that's like, oh, I just want to talk about this more between now and then, we're happy to do it. We've got Ci3T trainer and coaches calls every month. You can drop in, you can ask questions there. So know that we're here. The other thing I want to say, if you are here as one of our 6 partner districts this year, you have in your inbox an email from Mark Buckman where you're going to get a chance to say, here is what I'm thinking. Like there's the Ci3T usage survey. We'd love to have your feedback. And if you are somebody that provides instruction to students in those 6 districts, there's also an opportunity for you to give feedback on your own sense of efficacy. And this is the last thing I want to say to you before you guys take off for tonight. On this tab, Enhancing Ci3T, where you're finding these modules, like this is what we just did tonight. So when you look here, if you want to, you could click on this link if you are not in one of those 6 districts. And if you don't know if you're in that district, just put private message somebody on our team and say, am I in this? And go ahead and we'll write it back. Just put the name of your district and we'll let you know yes or no. But go ahead and private message Elise if you would, and she'll hit you back. And if you're not one of those 6 districts, click here. It will take you to a link and you can tell us things that you like and things you'd like to see differently. And if you would like to talk in out loud words to a person, please, by all means, click this consent form and we can talk to you. So whether you're one of the 6 schools, we can talk to you there. If you're one of the other people that are here tonight, we can talk to you by accessing time with you right here. And the reason we do this is we are budgeted for an entire another year to work on revisions for this. And then David and Mark and Amy Breach and I have another grant under review that will look at this to scale it up for middle and high school. And we hope to hear in the next 30 days if that's going to be a possibility. So with that, thank you for the gift of your time. Happy end to this academic year. We still have additional coaching calls. Eric can pop the next date in the chat. And we are deeply, deeply thankful for your partnership. And if you have time to also let us know how tonight went with you. But I do want to just give one final thank you to Elise Saracen and Stacy Williams and all the people that make this possible, the work and the time. So thank you for the gift. And we look forward to seeing you soon. If you need anything, please reach out. Take care and enjoy your evening. Thank you.